Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Rabbi Chaim Pupko of Congregation Ava Torah, and I'm joined by my dear friends and colleagues,
Rabbi Akiva Block, Kilat Kesher,
and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg, Eitz Chaim, the Englewood Stiebel.
I want to thank our sponsor this week. The One Pasuk podcast is generously sponsored by an anonymous donor on behalf of the members of the Eitz Chaim Minyan of Congregation Avas Torah. Emphasis on the definite article "the" for the grammar enthusiasts out there, in honor of these three rabbanim coming together to bring Torah unity and very healthy competition to Englewood. And I would only add to that, Kinas Sofrim Tarba Chachma, the Gemara in Bava Basra says, when scholars are eager to learn from one another, wisdom increases. Thank you again so much to our anonymous donor for supporting the One Pasuk podcast. To sponsor an episode, visit onepasukpodcast.com and click on the sponsorship link. And please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Our one pasuk for Parshas Yisro comes from Perek Yutes Pasuk Yud, chapter 18, verse 10. Yisro arrives on the scene after the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the miracles of the splitting of the sea. Vayomer Yisro, Baruch Hashem asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim umiyad Paro. Blessed be Hashem, Yisro says, who delivered you from the Egyptians and from Paro. Asher hitzil eschem mitachas yad Mitzrayim, who delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Before we dive into the pasuk, we're recording this the week in which the remains of Ron Gvili have been found and returned, representing the completion of the mission of bringing back the hostages. And there's just a natural connection with the Parsha. But I'm curious to hear what you guys are thinking about in terms of this as a milestone, as an event. The return of his remains, on the one hand, he did not come back alive, but on the other hand, there's something to acknowledge here. Curious how you guys are thinking about it.
It calls to mind, for me, the Shvatim returning the bones of Yosef to Shechem.
I've been hearing that from people.
And the sense that we can't rewrite history. We can't make right every missed opportunity and every failure. But we can do our best with what means are at our disposal to honor the memory and the legacy of people and to try to bring a chapter to a close as best we can. And to me, I guess the nearest similar precedent paradigm would be bringing Yosef back to Shechem, back to the very place where he had, at least initially was looking for his brothers, right to the beginning of that story.
Right.
I wrote a message to my community the morning of Ron Gvili's return, and I also referenced the return of Yosef, which, like you said, Rabbi Pupko, we're recording this the week of Parshas Beshalach. And it's so interesting that when the Torah mentions, really out of nowhere, as the people are on their way out, Vayihi Beshalach Paro, they're on their way out, and out of nowhere the Torah mentions the one piece of cargo that the Torah explicitly refers to as Bnei Yisrael taking with them is Moshe's retrieving the bones of Yosef. And Vayikach Moshe Atzmos Yosef Imo. Moshe took the bones with him. He didn't even delegate or ask someone else to do it for him. Moshe was the busy leader of the Jewish people. There was probably a lot to do as they're on their way out, and Moshe takes the time to go retrieve the bones, and the Torah gives the reason why Moshe does so. Ki hashpeya hishpiya es b'nei Yisrael lemor, because Yosef made b'nei Yisrael swear, and on his deathbed, they would take his bones with them. He didn't tell them when Hashem was taking them out. He didn't tell them if it would be tomorrow or in 10 years or in 100 years or in 200 years. There will come a time where you go and you leave, but when you leave, you must take my bones with you. And I think that sacred oath resonates for all time. Ki hashpeya hishpiya. We have promised, we've pledged, we've sworn that we leave nobody behind. And I've seen actually Ron Gvili's name written in different ways. One of the ways in which it's been written is actually an adaptation of the word goali, which I think is really very fitting and symbolic that the word goel, which really is redemption, this chapter has come to a close and it has reinforced for all of us our commitment to, our love for, our devotion for every member of the Jewish people, no matter where they are, who they are. We leave nobody behind. And we have, in many ways, fought this war for this moment to be able to say that we've gotten everybody out.
Yeah.
And, yes, we want to vanquish our enemies. I'm not sure if ever that was really fully realistic, but really to be able to get everybody out for the first time in many, many years, to have no hostages in Gaza, is really a go Ali. It is a moment of redemption for the Jewish people. I find that really deeply, deeply moving. And we should say Baruch Hashem about this moment, because it really is quite special.
Yeah. I'm sure you guys have seen that video clip of one of the commanders at the conclusion of the operation reciting this pasuk, Hashbea Hishbea. And it's so powerful. You get overwhelmed with emotion just watching and listening to those words come out of the mouth of the soldiers that did this. And I think, just playing off on what both of you are saying a little bit, I was thinking, on the one hand, it's a sad moment that he wasn't returned alive, that he was murdered. But on the other hand, it represents something very important. And so the way I was reconciling those two is the fact that what this moment represents is the commitment of our people, both to every Jew today and Jews across time, and that we continue to honor the memory of those who came before us, those who made sacrifices. And just like in the army, a soldier needs to know that they're always going to come for him. I think that's just it's embedded into our sense of solidarity with each other, that we're always thinking about each other and previous generations. And it makes the moment, I think, more timeless, more transcendent. All right, so let's get back to our pasuk, Ben Yisro. And Rabbi Goldberg, what do you got for us?
There's a really interesting, striking Gemara in Brachos that says that it reflected negatively on the Jewish people that it took Yisro to say the words Baruch Hashem. That somehow this notion of blessing Hashem, it had to come from Yisro, from an outsider, and it did not come from the Jewish people. Rav Yaakov Medan adds something I think really fantastic. He notes that there are 4 times in the Torah when someone says Baruch Hashem, 4 times. And each one of them is not Jewish. The first is Noach, Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem. The next is Malki Tzedek, Baruch Avram Lekel Elyon, Konei Shamayim Va'aretz. And then finally, the servant of Avram, often identified as Eliezer, says Baruch Hashem Elokei Adoni Avraham. So 4 times, right? And then we have Yisro, 4 times when this is uttered, always from an outsider. And I think what it underscores, certainly looking at all these pieces together, is this notion that naturally it's hard to always be aware of and living with the consciousness of our blessings and the blessing that we have to be in relationship with Hashem and the blessings that Hashem constantly bestows upon the Jewish people. And sometimes it simply takes an outsider in order to recognize it. And I think that's so beautifully underscored here by the notion that 4 times in the Torah Baruch Hashem is said, or some variety of Baruch Hashem, and it's always not Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, or Bnei Yisrael, which is amazing.
I love the thought, and it really underscores something which we always say, but probably don't think about enough, like really deeply, that the religion of the Jewish people is the domain of the Jewish people, but the God of the Jewish people is the God of everybody. And the Baruch Hashem, which is so ubiquitous. You think about, they say that, I think it's the Baal Shem Tov, they say that the Baal Shem Tov used to go around asking people how they are, just so that they could respond to him, Baruch Hashem, because he said every Baruch Hashem is a kiyum of the pasuk of Ve'ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehilos Yisrael. Hashem, you sit on the throne of the praises of Am. Every Baruch Hashem enthrones HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the most Jewish response, Baruch Hashem. And yet the most Jewish response comes from the nations of the world who taught us what it means to praise Hashem. And we, Baruch Hashem, it's like we throw it around, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. The Uncle Moshe song, Baruch Hashem, which is Baruch Hashem. It's what we say, Baruch Hashem. But the words are so profound, and their source actually is from a bystander.
Going like a little deeper, you could also say that there's really a great chiddush. There's something so novel and in a sense preposterous about us blessing God? Like, what exactly, just if we get into the mechanics and nuts and bolts, I guess I'll turn this to the two of you, esteemed rabbis. What does it mean to bless God? How do I bless God?
So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
Ah, I teed it up.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I teed it up late, even as versus Ramban.
Proof positive
But-
that this is not planned in advance.
But before we go there, I want to ask a different question because we
Curveball.
we
We need that transition music, Rabbi. Transition music.
got to come up with something. If you have suggestions.
Transition.
What was that? Was that like, I was going to do like a play on tradition? Transition, like something like that.
Needs a little work, Rabbi
Needs a
Goldberg.
little-
Sorry.
Yeah, it needs a little.
I'm
Yeah.
sure I can get AI to give us like a musical choral rendition of a transition.
Yes,
I'm going to play with that.
there's something there.
There's something there.
Rabbi, go ahead.
We were just having a conversation at the Shabbos table this past Shabbos about saying Baruch Hashem like all the time and saying it on like very trivial things. Like, I couldn't find my pen. Baruch Hashem, I found it, right? Or just somebody asks you a question, like how you're doing or whatever, and you just say Baruch Hashem. And is it a good thing to be constantly saying Baruch Hashem, or does it trivialize it a little bit to use it so mindlessly and for such trivial things? I'm curious if you guys have a take.
I don't think about Baruch Hashem as like a theological statement. I think it is a beautiful thing that Hashem is on the lips of Jewish people all the time. I think that, to quote Rabbi Sachs, who I think I've quoted in this regard here on the podcast before, Rabbi Sachs lamented that for modern Orthodox Jews, everything always needs to be polysyllabic. Like, stop criticizing so much. It's a good thing people are talking about Hashem. So we moderns, to use a Rabbi Lamb term, we're nuanced and we're sophisticated and we're complex. Is it really theologically appropriate to always be saying Baruch Hashem? Like, I understand the sentiment. I get it. Is it trivializing? Maybe it's trivializing.
So you question the question.
I understand the question, and I might even agree with the sentiment. But sometimes we just need to let go and say it's beautiful. It's like
Let go and let God.
like, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago about the Hashem Yitbarach Tamid Ohevoti song. Right. It's like theologically, I find that song to be profoundly disturbing. But like then you take a step back and you're like, Jews, totally secular Jews who don't live as Jews the way we live, are singing about Hashem. I mean, is that really something we want to be questioning? Or yes, there are problems.
Yeah, you can dissect the phenomenon. You can dissect a particular moment when somebody says Baruch Hashem. But if you take a step back, for that to be the go-to phrase or the familiar phrase, the thing that you use, reflects a certain mindset. There's a positive.
And yes, it is true that we can quibble with the phrase and that we could perhaps say that Kadosh Baruch Hu's hand wasn't involved in you finding your pen. One wouldn't be an apikoros if they said that. And maybe it's a more dignified and more appropriate view of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand in this world to say that.
Right.
But it's a quibble. And,
And who's to say it is the more correct approach? I mean,
nobody.
This is the stuff of deep medieval philosophical debate among the Rishonim. Then it's in the Gemara. I mean, the Gemara says if you reach into your pocket and you pull out one coin versus the other, Hashem's doing. So it's certainly a well-established strain of thought within Jewish thinking that when you found your pen, it was a Baruch Hashem. And I think our lives are only enriched by thinking that. It creates, maybe there are knock-on effects for when you don't find your pen. But I think always being God aware, I think it's hard to think of it as anything other than a very beautiful net positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like everything that's a beautiful net positive, even if it's an overwhelmingly net positive, it does come at a cost. And like you said, the collateral damage of when a person doesn't find their pen ultimately could be damaging. And maybe the extent to which we feel we have no agency, the old, I sent you a boat, I sent you a plane, I sent you a helicopter story, and you didn't take it, is a real problem. But, I mean, in the aggregate, very difficult to say it's not a net positive for people to be saying Baruch Hashem all the time.
Nice.
So the judges panel looks like we're 3 for 3. Baruch Hashem is going to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? Anybody even know what I'm referencing?
I was going to say this later, but I was thinking that Parshas Yisro, he came around at a time where they didn't have something like trademarks and branding. Otherwise, he'd be like the richest man who ever lived, right? He'd be like the thank you Hashem of his generation, right? The TYH. He was the BH before there was TYH.
Well, it calls to mind also a song, right? Ribona olamim matzati shtei milim sheyehudim omrim b'kol makom, right? That's about Yishtabach Shema. Same idea.
Yeah, the Sephardic world has different variations of our Baruch Hashem, Toda La'el and Hodu Lashem.
Yes.
I guess first I'll take 30 seconds and add to what you said and say that the Tiferet Shlomo, the Rabbi Shlomo of Radomsk, asks a very poignant question on that Gemara. Genaihu l'Moshe u'l'shishim ribu miYisrael. It's a disgrace for Moshe Rabbeinu and the 600,000 that they didn't say Baruch Hashem. And Radomsker says they just got finished singing the Az Yashir. Like talk about quibbling. We're upset they didn't say the words Baruch Hashem. It's a kind of an odd criticism that the Gemara has for Moshe and the people of Israel. And what he answers is it's not the Baruch Hashem, it's the Baruch Hashem asher hitzil eschem. That blessed are you Hashem, that he saved you, Moshe and Aaron and the people of Israel. Yisro was the first person to actually praise Hashem and thank Hashem for the redemption and the salvation of others. Not thanking Hashem for something that happened to him, but actually witnessing, like you said, as an outsider. That's what Yisro brought to the world. And that was a disgrace, that Am Yisrael couldn't actually look beyond their own Dalet Amos. And that's maybe what the Gemara is saying. But what I did want to say was the pasuk is odd for another reason as well, because if you look at it in a larger context, Yisro comes, Vayishma Yisro Kohen Midyan Chosein Moshe. Yisro, at the beginning of the Parsha, he hears what happened, and Rashi cites the Midrash, the Gemara, that says, Ma Shmua Shama Uba. There are different opinions in the Gemara. The ones that Rashi cites are the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek, or what Yisro heard, and he came. So Yisro was fully aware of the miracles that God brought about on behalf of the Jewish people. He knew what had happened. He was familiar with the miracles and the wonders and the redemption and the salvation. And he comes and he doesn't immediately say Baruch Hashem. He comes, and then only later what happens? Moshe sits him down. Vayisaper Moshe lechosno. Moshe tells him everything that happened. And only after he tells him everything that happened, Vayichad Yisro, Yisro rejoices and he says Baruch Hashem. So why the Baruch Hashem only when he heard it from the horse's mouth? Why didn't he, where was the Baruch Hashem initially when he heard about the miracles? And I think it teaches us something else about the religious experience and our relationship with Hashem, our relationship with Am Yisrael, and with the observance of Torah in general. Yisro was a religious man. He was a Kohen Midyan. A miracle or two in his life probably had occurred, whether it was sorcery or magic. Yisro was not impressed by miracles. The miracles are not what influenced Yisro or moved him to say Baruch Hashem. What moved him to say Baruch Hashem was when Moshe sat him down and Moshe actually told him and related to him everything that happened. He saw how these events and these experiences changed him, changed Moshe, changed Aaron, changed the people. They became different people. Miracles are miracles, but for a miracle to actually transform a nation into something that's completely different from what it was, that was new. That deserves a Baruch Hashem. That was something that Yisro had never seen before. And Yisro said, this God and these people are just different. They don't just experience miracles, but they actually internalize them and make of them something different. Vayisaper Moshe lechosno. Moshe told him everything that happened. Yisro saw in Moshe's face the reaction, the transformation, the metamorphosis that happened to Moshe and his people, and that deserved a response of Baruch Hashem.
He heard it, but to see in Moshe, not the miracles, to see what the miracles had done, had accomplished, it's a more intense experience of them.
It's a beautiful idea. It also calls to mind just a few things about rehearing something you've already heard. Firstly, we all have this impulse that someone tells us something that we've heard already or saw already, or we say, oh, I heard that already. Don't feel so good about sharing this thing with me.
Especially a joke.
Right, exactly. Don't feel so good about hearing this thing, about sharing this with me, because I already heard it actually. And that's, I don't know where that impulse comes from. You don't want to give someone the satisfaction, but just be a good listener. You didn't just tell Moshe, actually, I heard about the miracles already. And so to me, there's a message there. And a beautiful idea that it calls to mind, I've heard from Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, that when he speaks about being a Talmud of Rav Shechter, so Hershel Schachter, of course, has an incredible grasp of Kol HaTorah Kula, but there are certain themes that if you listen, I like to listen to his Divrei Torah, and there are certain themes that he comes back to time and again. And he said, if you're not a Talmud of Rav Shechter, so when he's repeating something, you just say, oh, I've heard him say this already. But if you're a real Talmud, you're excited to hear it again because you want to hear the nuances. You want to hear the Talmidim will smile at each other and they're listening even more closely because this is important and you'll get a new nuance. And so to rehear something is not so terrible, right? It can be something enriching. And so that also called that to mind.
That's beautiful, that idea. So as I mentioned before, I wanted to focus on the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban who comment on this pasuk because when Yisro says, Baruch Hashem, upon hearing the entire story from Moshe, at that moment, he's highlighting one of our most fundamental theological questions, namely, how does Hashem relate to this world and how do we relate to Hashem? And the question is simply, like Rabbi Goldberg mentioned, is what does it mean for a person to bless Hashem? Hashem is perfect. Hashem doesn't change. So what does it mean that bless Hashem? So the Ibn Ezra relies heavily on grammar to explain this very fundamental theological concept. In analyzing the grammar, which I won't go through because grammar is boring.
This is a mind-spinning Ibn Ezra. I'm so impressed that you're referencing this Ibn Ezra.
All right, let's see how well I do.
All right.
Again, I don't want to get into the details of the grammar, which is really the heart of it, but he says that Baruch has to be understood as an adjective, as a description. We are describing that God is blessed. We are not blessing him. We're not elevating him. We're not changing him. God is already complete. He's already whole. And so he's the source of all blessing. And so when we say Baruch, we're not necessarily performing an action. We're describing a reality. It's an expression of faith. It's like saying Shema Yisrael, Baruch Hashem. I'm declaring my faith that Hashem is the source of all blessing before I partake of that blessing in certain circumstances or before I perform a mitzvah, whenever we say a bracha. The Ramban agrees with Ibn Ezra, but also disagrees. The Ramban, relying on Jewish mysticism, says that when we say Baruch, what we are doing is we are influencing Hashem's influence on the world. When we say Baruch, we are channeling Hashem's influence in this world. The mystics call the Shefa, right? The divine outpouring, the stuff that he gives to this world. And so while we're not affecting God, we are affecting what God provides. And that we can have influence on. So that when we say a bracha, we are bringing down more shefa, we are rechanneling it, we are helping to reallocate it, as it were, which is, again, it's a deep mystical concept, but I'd like to stay at the surface a little bit and to say that the difference between the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, both of whom I think are capturing something accurate, though, is that for the Ibn Ezra, Hashem is this being that we cannot understand. It's hard to relate to. And it leaves us having to navigate that relationship with Hashem on our own. As opposed to the Ramban, who is inviting us to feel a little bit closer to Hashem, feel a little bit more in relation to Hashem, because we have the capacity to interact. We may not have the capacity to interact with Hashem directly, but in terms of everything that Hashem bestows on the world, we can engage that. And I think it's more empowering. And I think it's a way to approach what we always think about is what I do matters. Or I know what I'm doing matters, but I don't know how, right? To live as a Jew and to do mitzvos, obviously when we provide for others, we see the impact. But when it comes to mitzvos ben adam l'makom, it requires emunah, a certain belief, to believe that we're doing something. So I think in offering us this mystical idea, I think what the Ramban is allowing us to do is to imagine a little bit our impact on the spiritual world. And I think that helps us. I think it helps us feel like what we're doing has more meaning.
In that context, it's really interesting that the first word of Shacharis, the first word of our morning prayers is Baruch. Baruch she'amar v'haya olam. Baruch, Baruch Choseh, Baruch Choseh v'shes, Baruch Hamer v'yaseh, Baruch, 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 Baruch. And this is Psukei de Zimra, which there are verses of praise of Hashem, verses of song. It's interesting to think about the dual meaning of the word Baruch as both a verb and as an adjective. We are blessing Hashem, but also really just describing a reality. And you can only come to pray to Hashem in the first place, to get to Rabbi Goldberg's point from before about how we're blessing Hashem at all. Maybe it's really just that we can come to Hashem and maybe even bless Hashem when we recognize the Baruch as an adjective. Baruch she'amar v'haya, Hashem already is blessed. We really have nothing to offer. And because we understand we have nothing to offer, we're able actually to offer something.
Yeah.
Both of those things together really allow us to, Ibn Ezra and the Ramban combined really allow us to encounter Hashem in an appropriate way.
Yeah. In fact, you gave me an idea in that, and maybe you're basically saying this, but you can combine the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban by saying that in order to get to that point where you feel like you're contributing something to the spiritual world, it has to start with an awareness. It has to start with a recognition, right? You have to start with Ibn Ezra. You have to start with this notion that I recognize and I believe that Hashem is the source of all blessing. And now that I recognize and acknowledge that Hashem is the source of all blessing, I can now think about that blessing and think about how I can channel that blessing and things of that sort.
Yeah, it fits very beautifully with the Ramban's comment at the end of Parshas Bo. It's a well-known piece from Ramban, but this is the lesser-known part of it. But he says the whole point of creation, the whole point of humanity existing is sheyeda and sheyoda, that we should both know and acknowledge and thank God for having created us. And our whole goal of being alive is singing Hashem's praises and to say, Briosecha anachnu, we are your creations. And so I think it plays into this notion of Baruch in the Ramban, which is very beautiful.
All right. Shkoch. Nicely done.
Great, everyone.